Was my brief update on the Act A, and I hope that that was helpful in terms of just providing a base sort of understanding. I did just want to, and sorry, excuse me if I'm just flipping back and forth between a couple of different things, but I did just want to give you a little idea of some of the work that we've been doing as a platform. And I think it's fair to say that our focus has been on ensuring that we get civil society and community representation within all of the pillars and their working groups. And while we might have hoped in mid-June that we were much closer to that, it is still something that's being worked on, particularly in two of the pillars, the health system connector and vaccines to a larger extent. So just to say that that has been a main focus because it hasn't been a given. It wasn't necessarily there weren't necessarily spaces or processes that were held for civil society and communities to be engaged directly in the pillars, and some leading agencies within the pillars have been more receptive and more collaborative than others. So that remains sort of the key piece of work, but I did just want to remind everyone about some of the work that we've done together and called on many of you to sign on to, and that included in early June, all of the civil society representatives at the time sending a letter to the lead agencies requesting civil society and community participation. We did receive a we did receive a response to that. The link for that is there in the presentation. We'll see if we can transfer it over into the chat in case you haven't had a chance to see that. But we did receive a response, which I would say was, as you might expect from a letter that's coming back to you from a number of different agencies and a number of different organizations. It maybe wasn't as specific as we might have hoped, but it did overall sort of generally confirm the role and the need for civil society and communities within the Act A work. More recently, we had circulated a solidarity sign-on, and over 175 organizations did sign on in less than a 24-hour period, which was amazing. So thank you to all of you who did sign on and who did circulate that and encourage colleagues to sign on to that. And that was sent to the Gavi board and very specifically held I'm not sure if it is the right word, but we were sort of using it informally, a business case or a rationale for why civil society and community involvement should be integrated and fully embedded within the vaccines pillar. So that was sent on July 29th ahead of the Gavi board meeting on July 30th, and we'll hope to hear a bit of an update today during our updates on those different pillars about sort of where that leaves us now. And I did just want to point out that please understand it is very early days for us too, but we have at ICSS, my colleague Tara, who some of you heard earlier at the beginning of the call, has set up sort of a skeleton website, COVID-19advocacy.org, where we hope to be able to populate information from these calls around these efforts so that we have a space that's public and available to everyone who is able to access the information. I guess everybody knows what a website's for. I don't probably need to elaborate on that, but just to say that we've just got it up and running in the last couple of days, and so we're looking forward to comments as well around different pieces of information or other efforts that we could link to through that website to make sure that there's a broad section of information available to everyone. So that, I think, concludes most of what I wanted to say in terms of introductions. I did just want to, at the top of the call, remind everyone that there are two selection processes for civil society and communities currently underway. There is one sort of additional, I wouldn't want to call it an add-on, but additional time within the therapeutics pillar to make sure that we find and can engage people living with COVID or who have had COVID within the therapeutics pillar, and so that is ongoing. And there's also within the diagnostics pillar, we have open until next Friday, the 14th of August, a full selection process, again, including people who have lived with COVID, but also others with other technical expertise to become more permanent representatives within the diagnostics pillar. So I know I'll come back to that when I give a bit of an update with my colleagues from the diagnostics pillar, but I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that opportunity for those of you who are interested in becoming more engaged to do so. So if I could pass it on now to colleagues Courtney and Mike from Stop AIDS in the UK, who have been supporting a lot of this work, and get a quick update from them on some of the platform work to engage people living with COVID in this work. So over to you, Mike and Courtney.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, Courtney and I will just give an update on community of people living with COVID and long COVID in terms of this work. And so I'll start, just give an update, and Courtney will talk about next steps. So, as you know, and Katie just sort of outlined, the ACT Accelerator and is a fast-moving process with decisions being made on research, therapeutics, diagnostics, and vaccines. And we need to ensure community voices of people who've been infected with COVID and people living with long COVID, which is sort of a distinct also group of people who are experiencing the impacts of COVID over a long period of time, and that their voices are heard in these discussions and decision-making processes. There are emerging groups and peer support networks for people living with COVID across Facebook and numerous other platforms. This has really started to happen in particular in the UK, Europe and US, and places like South Africa, where the COVID pandemic has hit first and hardest. For the time being, but there is no doubt that groups will be emerging and are emerging, building in other regions as COVID takes its toll. We need to ensure that meaningful involvement of people living with COVID-19, especially long COVID, is at a global level and is really seen across all regions as the epidemic progresses. As Katie highlighted, civil society and communities have called for formal representation in all the pillars and oversight mechanisms of the ACT Accelerator. And this call actively includes the critical need for inclusion of people living with COVID and long COVID. In the therapeutics pillar, there are currently, as Katie highlighted, there are processes to identify community representatives, and that process specifically identifies the need to have the desire to have someone living with COVID, as is the case also for the diagnostic pillar. As Katie highlighted, for the health system strengthening connector and the vaccine pillar, we're still quite far behind in the process of actually even getting agreement to have reps and permanent reps. And so, but we hope that those, and will ensure that those processes include communities as we go forward. We've been having ongoing discussions with members of the long COVID-19 community group and civil society and community organisations engaged on ACT Accelerator on how we can ensure their ongoing meaningful engagement. We had a call last week and sort of highlighted a few key issues we thought would be helpful to point out here. First one is really just facilitating their participation in sort of understanding what the ACT Accelerator is, what all the different structures are, all the different acronyms, in order to just engage with it as a structure and a process. But also what reasonable accommodations can be made to ensure that they can participate even as a civil society rep, community rep, but recognizing that they may have health issues that might prevent them from doing so continuously. So looking at things like having alternative representatives who can step in and provide sort of additional support. So sort of job sharing on CS rep roles might be one way forward there. The other key area that was highlighted was around the critical importance of funding support for those community representatives, many of whom are facing challenging employment situations themselves. So we can't, I mean, it's challenging for all civil society reps, but particularly community reps and those living with COVID, who, you know, can't be expected to do sort of representative work for free. So we're really looking at how we can ensure funding for those individuals. We will be going to, you know, obviously the lead agencies of the ACT Accelerator, but we need to explore other options. And the other sort of key area is, of course, keeping broader communities of people living with COVID and long COVID up to date, so that they know what's happening in the ACT Accelerator, what the key discussions are, and of course, giving the broader community an opportunity to feed in through consultations. So I'll hand over to Courtney now just to talk about key next steps.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think based on our call last week and some work we've been doing, we've kind of identified 3 main next steps. So as Katie and Mike both mentioned, we have the 2 open calls for diagnostics and therapeutics, and I see that Wim has shared the link for therapeutics, so thank you for sharing that. And we'll share the diagnostics link as well. Both of those open calls are closing within the next week, therapeutics on the 9th, and I think 14th for diagnostics. So making sure that we secure representatives within all of those working groups across the diagnostics and therapeutics pillar, and ensuring we have mechanisms set up so that all representatives within the pillars have an opportunity to connect with people living with COVID, making sure that they can hear their lived experiences and their thoughts on the work of ACT, and also that those representatives can keep communities of people living with COVID updated on the work of the partnership. The second one, which Mike mentioned, is making sure that we secure funding, particularly to support community representatives. So putting together a proposal that would go to the ACT agencies, private foundations, if not, or maybe some INGOs. And the third point, which we'll come back to as well in sort of the last section, but really making sure that we are connecting and understanding where those groups and communities are of people living with COVID-19. So thinking about our own communication channels, how we're sharing information, how we're seeking input into discussions. So really doing a mapping to understand how we can connect with all of the different groups and support them if they do want to be involved in the work of ACT. Thanks.
Thanks both, appreciate those updates. And I would, sorry everyone, I think some of the slides were changing. Sorry, just to be clear, there were no slides for the previous updates. Those were just oral updates, and we will be making the recording of this call and all of the presentations that we do give available on our website after the call. So we'll make sure that that is sent around and updated as soon as possible. Essentially, just takes a little bit of time to convert the files once the calls are finished. So apologies if folks were expecting other slides, but there weren't slides for those most recent updates. What I would like to do now is move to our next agenda item, noting that there will be an opportunity for Q&A once we've gone through all of these different updates. But I would like to move to the next item to get updates from colleagues from the different pillars in case they answer some of the questions that those of you might have. So I'd like to call on Javier Belloc, who's a colleague of mine at ICSS and also on the CSEM UHC 2030 steering committee, but also has been heavily engaged in the health systems connector. So Javier, if I could call on you to provide an update from that pillar, and did you want me to share the slides that were sent earlier, or did you want to do that yourself? Just let me know when you start.
Yeah, probably if you can share, because I try, but I'm not allowed to. So as you wish. Okay. No, still not be able to share my screen. That's great. Thank you, Katie. Can we enlarge to show presentation? Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm presenting to you some update on the ACT Accelerator work stream from the last few weeks. Robin Montgomery and Justin Koenig is also serving as me as an interim members of civil society in this work stream. We are discussing within the work stream and we, the civil society colleagues, how the selection of the definitive civil society representative will happen probably after the holiday seasons on the so-called North. So for now, we are acting as an interim representative. Next. Okay, so the overall update, as has been said, we are not a pillar. We are a working group or a work stream that's round below, trying to cross-cutting the other three pillars. We basically, one of the main principles is not to do not duplicate what the concrete pillars are doing. It's more about how we can identify which goal of critical health systems bottlenecks are happening to impeding delivery, for example, of vaccines, therapeutics, or diagnostics. So there is two things happening at the same time. In one hand, we are discussing within the working group and we are the pillars, what are the bottlenecks, and the same for future vaccines or not currently therapeutic or diagnostic, but also looking into core health system issues like, for example, availability of personal protection equipment and stuff like that, health, training and support of health system workers. This was the last there was the fourth element that came into existence, and as a recognition that we need a stream of work that is looking into the health system as a whole and connecting the dots between the three formerly known as pillars. And it's also recognizing that each work stream, its difficulty of drawing a fine line being narrow on COVID-19 focus while working into the context of the broader long from health system issues. And in this relation, the civil society engagement mechanism from UHC 2030 was initially invited to act as interim civil society representative, since we also, within the partnership of UHC 2030, we are also discussing health systems and universal health coverage in the light of the pandemic. Next. Next, please. Thank you. So I can share with you latest deliverables. So that's also maybe interesting for people who have been in this call for a long time. And I might probably don't have all the answers that you might have, but I will make sure that together with Justin and Robin, we can provide proper answers. Within the health system, within the health financing work stream, we identify some deliverables, which is assisting identify countries, and this is important because ACTA in many regards will be focusing on a list of few countries in the beginning. So assist countries identify and prioritize where to invest, how to mobilize and make resources available for frontline to deploy the tools, creating accountability for financing, using, for example, UHC 2030 PA for each country coordinating platforms that they already exist pre-COVID or in some countries, and learning and knowledge sharing around using of health financing. In terms of the community-led response work stream, that's having its own life as usual when it comes to civil society. We have been meeting on a weekly basis, supported by the Global Fund. We're looking into leverage existing relevant global initiative and country platforms for community engagement. There are things happening in countries that they are not necessarily reflecting on our progress updates, or it's not, we don't know that's going on. Addressing misinformation. This is a deliverable that at this top global level, not sure how we will do that, but we can support civil society in country to address misinformation. The issue of knowledge management, to look into best practice, lesson learned, and channeling countries to available resources for the preparation of concrete activities and deliverables at the country level. For example, there was ideas around of preparing a checklist for organizing the direct country response. So that's health financing, community-led response. The next slide, please. The third work stream is, of course, is very important for us, and in the works and in this accelerator, we invest a lot of time discussing that, which is protecting frontline health workers, which also includes civil society and community health workers, I should underline. And of course, the discussion about immediate priority to ensure availability to personal protection equipment, which continues to be a huge challenge around the world. Improve basic infrastructure in the facilities like wash, electricity, and connectivity, which also is a challenge in some countries. Support implementation of country-based health services, including scale-up of training of workers for frontline services. And as you know, when countries like mine now are in the middle of the acute COVID-19 crisis, basically we are mobilizing new health workers we are not properly trained to catch on and support the people who has been already burned out in our hospitals. Next one. Wait. And the fourth one is the integrated data management workstream, which we'll also working with HDC and other partners to provide a useful and readable dashboard for policymakers and ACTA partners, support countries to sustainable strengthening the information system. As we know, in other diseases, this is one of the weakest links. Also do a bit of crisis monitoring and a watchdog function in case we need to raise the alarm and concrete concerns on things are going wrong in some countries. And basically the work of preparation of integration ACTA tools. That will be the last deliverable. Next. Well, one significant issue that has been discussed for a while now is supply chain work stream. And the deliverables among this work stream is the difficult task to do demand forecast and the scenarios on the cold chain needs for some stuff, including in the future, of course, vaccines, etc. The assessment of the supply landscape is very important, mapping current products and manufacturer landscape, gap analysis versus needs for demand forecast, etc. The operational model, it's important again to assess what is to be provided at the grassroots level or in the countries, or to be able to deliver, for example, a new diagnostic technology or a vaccine. And of course, resources need to be identified. The sixth work stream is private sector work stream. Not precisely a very clear one as usual. They are now doing a mapping and also tapping into the Universal Health Coverage 2030 Partnership Private Sector Constituency, long title, and see what they can bring into the equation. Of course, when we refer to private sector, we're not saying in pharma industry or whatever, or PPE manufacturer. We're talking about private sector across the board. I think identify institutional capacity needs for further private sector engagement and measuring success. The seventh work stream, it's more in the initial stage. It's clinical. It's a clinical care work stream. Next, I think it's the last one. No, okay. The last one is about. We always said, and I think in the pillars too, that we need to show some quick wins, especially because at the present stage, when everything is happening in a very vertical silo sometimes about like, oh, vaccines, therapeutical, diagnostics, we also need to make the case that not only we need to collaborate among the work streams or pillars, but we also need to think what are the efforts we need to put in place to prepare the landing, for example, of a new vaccine in a prioritized country. So we are the quick wins with the concrete steps to support country-level response has been a country-level approach discussion. We identified 3 to 6 countries from a proposed country list, and we will be starting the collaboration and the conversation across the 7 work stream with those countries. We are thinking of creating a survey to help select countries identify immediate needs, which call like we try to take the pulse. The third is a knowledge platform for countries to provide up-to-date lessons learned and share country-level experience of health system strengthening, etc. All our conversation with the pre-selected countries, stakeholders, and other countries is that basically they are struggling to find guidance and information even in the official pages like the WHO, etc. And finally, developing just-in-time technical notes and knowledge products in common areas demanded by countries. That could be PPE or whatever. So that's, sorry if it's a long presentation. And I hope if there is any very specific question, I might not be able to properly answer, but I'm happy to provide the answer in written by tomorrow.
Thank you, Javier. Appreciate that. And just as a reminder, we will make all of these slideshows available with the recording of the call so that folks can review, and if they have questions can be in touch. I'm going to stop sharing that particular presentation and pass it over to colleagues from the therapeutics. And I believe we've just lost one of our speakers. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get back in or has come in under a different line, Felipe, who is one of the new representatives in the therapeutics. But Brooke Baker is online as well. And Brooke, if I could pass it over to you, I know you were going to focus on work stream 2 within therapeutics, but perhaps if you could start with your update, please go ahead and we'll see if we can find Felipe.
Okay, well, I apologize we don't have a comprehensive slide presentation like we just heard from Health System Connector. And to be truthful, the current permanent reps to the therapeutics pillar are relatively new, and we're just gaining getting our feet wet in the pillar. And most of us have had at most 1 or 2 calls within the pillars at this point in time. I work in workstream 2. I can tell you a little bit about what I think is being covered in workstream 1, which is basically surveying the landscape for promising therapeutics. And of course, remdesivir and dexamethasone have kind of fallen in our laps, as early wins in terms of medicines that have some useful effect at particular stage of hospitalization with particular patient groups. Remdesivir, as people know, is problematic in terms of the degree of control exercised by Gilead and its stated pricing point for sales, and 52% of the people in the world, mainly people in upper income and upper middle income countries. But it has also issued a voluntary license, as people will know, for sales in lower middle income and low income countries to manufacturers in 3 countries. Some of those generic remdesivir is already available, but still relatively highly priced. Dexamethasone is a generic broadly available, and already there has been some commitment by UNAID and UNICEF and others to help buy some initial supplies to make sure that this product can get out to low and middle income countries, as well as being, of course, widely available in rich countries as well. But that's the immediate stream. I mean, the near stream is quite promising as well. And so, I think there's particular attention being paid to monoclonal antibodies, which may have both a role in prevention and in treatment of people who do have COVID. There are lots of products in the pipeline. They're being evaluated through several different mechanisms, both within the US, but certainly within the pillar itself, and also by a research group in California. And there is an expectation that they will come to the market relatively quickly, at least some of them. Regeneron, for example, has a two antibody compound that may be approved relatively quickly. Again, the concern will be price and availability in low and middle income countries. But again, the pillar one is focused mainly on what promising products there are. And with respect to other products, a little further downstream, we know that now with long COVID, there's going to be a need to come up with better therapies for people who have major systemic issues because of COVID infection, either the effects of the infection or even long-lasting ongoing infection. And frankly, there's research just starting, it seems, on those issues. And so I think that's unfortunately not going to be something that will be come to bear very quickly. But anyway, that's work stream one. Felipe, if he does get to join us, may be able to answer people's questions about that. I will unfortunately have to be jumping off at 9 o'clock. I work on work stream two, which is basically the market readiness work stream. And its job is to try to anticipate what kinds of interventions will be needed in order to ensure affordable supply of quality products to low and middle income countries. And so it's been spending its time trying to identify what the kinds of interventions that could be appropriate depending on the product and the owner of that product. This is where intellectual property issues come to play, advanced market commitments, supply guarantees, direct support to partnerships for scaling up supply, equitable open licensing provisions, and those kinds of issues. It also has to some extent, anticipate what the supply needs will be, and the marketing and the supply manufacturing capacity. Though some of that work does obviously intersect with work stream 3 as well. I think one of the things that we're trying to do as the civil society representatives to this pillar, and I think we have others on who can certainly add. I think we have some community members, at least one on the call as well. We're trying to form ourselves as a team, so we've got our own listserv set up. We're trying to increase our communication between work streams, and we're also trying to set up the mechanism by which we will be able to get input from colleagues and people living with COVID with respect to the issues that are coming up in the therapeutics pillar. A longer term project, which I think Katie has referred to, is the need to really have greater collaboration between all the pillars, all 4 pillars. And that's a work in progress as well. I will say that although the goal is, eventually to help the low and middle income countries have access to the new therapeutics that come on board, and there was some expectation that the therapeutics pillar would have money that would actually help with purchases. That's extremely problematic given the amount of funding presently that's come into the ACT Accelerator. If I'm correct, I think it's raised only about 10% of the budget that it had identified as needed to accomplish its goals and secure the supplies that it is projected. So one of the things I think we'll be continuing to look at is more money coming in, how much of it is disproportionately allocated to vaccines versus diagnostics and therapeutics, and certainly whether there will be enough to get any purchases, any market intervention purchases from the therapeutics pillar itself that will help trigger a favorable market for supply in low and middle income countries. So I think that's the major issue I would have, major points I would like to make at this point, though we will certainly try to keep people up to date with the slide presentations we see. We do share those. Workstream 1 is likely to have more private or confidential information, so its work products may not be as readily shared, but I think market intervention and pillar 3, workstream 3 certainly will be able to share information with folks and get feedback as needed.
Thanks, Brooke. That's really helpful. It's you are all very new in those positions on the therapeutics, so thanks for that comprehensive sort of update, and apologies to all that we do seem to have lost Felipe from the call. But just as Brooke noted, there are a number of others who participate in the therapeutics, and if they had anything else that they wanted to add in to that update, we'd welcome that. But also, I know Brooke's time is a little bit limited here in terms of needing to get on to another call, and Brooke has been also supporting around as an interim rep on the diagnostics pillar. I hope you are now seeing a slide that says diagnostics update. Sorry, my technical skills remain less than ideal for Zoom calls. And I wanted to give just sort of a very, very quick overview and show you an overview slide, and then make sure that we had an opportunity to hear from Brooke before he has to get off of the call. And so, sorry, I'm just there. Okay, goodness. So I did just want to share this overview slide, which was not made by me, just to be clear. This is fully copied from the slide that was presented at the most recent partnership call of the diagnostics pillar, which was July 30th, which gives just sort of a quick overview of some of the key areas of work within the pillar and some of the key milestones. And I'm going to flip away from this in shortly too, but don't worry. I'll come back to the slide, and I will make sure that and that it will be available online after, so you can look at some of the details a little bit more carefully and look over some of those numbers. But on that last point that Brooke just made around sort of funding, it is you can see in that middle column of funding needs. And again, this is just within the diagnostics pillar. You can see those little green bars are really, really low in terms of the funding that is needed within simply the diagnostics pillar, but this is true in therapeutics. This is true, I think, in health systems, and is even true in vaccines, despite a significant larger amount of money having been raised and identified to support the work in that pillar. So Brooke, if I'm just going to go back to my overview slide of quick updates, but if I could ask you to provide your update from your work within your working group in diagnostics, then I'll come back to this overall update so that we don't lose the chance to hear from you on this as well. So let's just go back to that. Brooke?
Well, I've been involved in the diagnostics pillar a little bit longer and kind of have my feet set there. I don't think I want to go through the details of the work, but rather to give a high-level overview and to identify what I think some of the particular issues are. So the pillar is basically decided at this point that part of its goal is to try to increase access to molecular viral tests, whether open or cartridge-based, because low and middle-income countries have been unable to get the necessary supplies to do the testing they need of their population, which is one reason why the COVID is spreading kind of without even knowing the extent of the spread in lots of African and Latin American and other southern countries. So that the expectation is what we need as an immediate goal, because that's the way tests are being conducted, is to increase that supply. And so there, particularly workstream 3 in diagnostics is now merged with the diagnostics consortium that had been arranging some basically bulk purchases and allocations of testing supplies to low and middle income countries. And that needs to continue and to accelerate. But the biggest goal, I think, of the diagnostics pillar is to try to accelerate the development, market entry, and scale of production and affordability of new antigen tests, which will have the advantage of being producing much quicker results, typically in under an hour, perhaps as fast as 15 minutes, more likely 30 minutes. And the expectation is that 75% of the supply that would be needed in low and middle income countries with respect to diagnosing people who are recently infected with COVID-19 will be met with these tests, which will be point of care, meaning that they can be used in remote situations in peri-urban areas. Basically, they'll be available for much wider use, including even community-based use, and assisting people initially with lay health workers, et cetera, community health workers. The goal is to get a quite affordable test, and affordability is defined as in two kind of goals. One is under $5, and a more aspirational goal is $1 or less. The World Health Organization just issued yesterday a new set of product specifications for the desired diagnostics. So we've been waiting for that to come up, but it has some detailed information on both what are minimum requirements for antigen tests and then desirable characteristics, and we will try to get you the web URL for that particular set of criteria. But basically, they're compromising a little bit on accuracy to try to increase the speed of development, of product development, and ultimate affordability. A fairly significant controversy within the pillar, not controversy, or issue that needs to be decided, is whether to look at antigen products, antigen tests that are device-based, meaning usually a handheld device that will read the results, or whether they'll be truly self-read tests, like essentially pregnancy tests, where you will put the sample testing device into a solution and get a readout. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. The device-based test is certainly more expensive because of the equipment costs and the training costs associated with the equipment, but it's likely to have better connectivity for clinical care and for epidemiological surveillance and tracing. The self-read or the lay community health worker read type test can certainly be done, but then you have to have another step for collecting the information and making sure that clinical decisions and surveillance needs are met through other means. Of course, the long-term goal might well be that we get to a situation like we have with HIV now, where there is self-testing once communities know enough about the importance of testing and how to react to tests if they are positive. That we may get there at some point in time. So there's been an expression of interest. I think the slide Katie showed, approximately over 70 expressions of interest came in. There was initial screening down to a little bit more than 30, but the goal is to get down to at least 2 to 4 suppliers who will be able to commit to supplying something like 245 million tests to low and middle income countries, I believe by the end of 2021. This is a relatively modest goal when you think about the populations involved. It certainly will not be anywhere close to the needs that for testing in those countries. I think one of the things that particularly the workstream 2 is looking at is the issue of the potential competition for this product from rich countries, which will certainly be important. In fact, it's a constant feature across all pillars, is that rich countries are trying to buy up initial supplies and are willing to pay higher prices, which incentivizes manufacturers to preferentially serve their interest and demand instead of the request for lower price products and more access in low and middle income countries. These are tests that are just starting to be rolled out in the US. They're going to be particularly appropriate in the private sector, companies checking their workforces, and the universities and schools. So there's going to be a lot of competition. The plus side is that the pipeline is very strong. The downside is that these tests, like everything else, could be gobbled up in terms of supplies by rich countries. So, I think that kind of feeds into a larger advocacy issue we all are facing. Because I have to hop off, Katie, if you don't mind, I'd like to make one point just which I hope will help trigger some of the discussion afterwards. I think that in general, we're seeing the ACT Accelerator have great intentions and statements of support, including from country leaders and regions. And yet at the same time, we're really experiencing a huge amount of nationalism and regionalism by the US and Europe and Japan and other upper income countries that can rush to the front of the line for all these products. There's really not equitable global access as the current race to products is showing. Instead, what we have is trying to safeguard supplies to low and middle income countries, and in a situation where countries are acting narcissistically and where companies are still trying to maximize profit and serve their most profitable clients. So I think one of the overarching issues we need to think about, two overarching issues are, is there going to be funding actually for the supply of low and middle income countries? And is there going to be anything left over? And of course, the question of whether anything is going to be left over depends significantly on whether supply is going to be expanded or not. And that's where all these market intervention questions come into effect. Are we going to allow other suppliers besides the right holders, besides the so-called innovators, to make these products so that they can be used in low and middle countries and hopefully produced to an increasing extent in low and middle income countries as well?
Thanks, Brooke. I really appreciate it, and I'm sorry, that these updates are so long, but there's a great amount of detail and a lot of information that's flowing at the moment. So really appreciate, Brooke, you making the time, and sorry that you can't stay on the call. I'm sure there will be questions that I'll have to come back to you on. But just to sort of go back to the diagnostics pillar in general, in addition to what Brooke was saying, and that really important last point, which I believe I said at the top of the call, perhaps not so concisely or coherently, but this equitable access mandate of ACTA is continues to be that sort of secondary mandate, when to a large extent it was the founding principle of ACTA. So we think that there's a lot of work in there, and I know that other colleagues within the therapeutics pillar have already begun some thinking around how we as advocates and as civil society talk about that equitable access mandate and how we use some of this technical information in smart strategic ways for advocacy messages to our governments and to private sector actors and others, as alongside these global health agencies that are involved in the leading of ACTA. So more to come on that, and it's sort of one of those things that I expect will remain a constant sort of concern and a constant sort of area of focus for us in terms of advocacy. I do want to get to vaccines. We're already an hour into the call, and I know everybody's time is really precious. We did put aside an hour and a half for this call, but we really do want to have time for questions and answers and discussion. So what I will say is that the slides will be available, and they'll be able to go through a little bit more detail and be able to provide a little bit more background information, but a few other key things within the diagnostics pillar that other colleagues have been working on within the different working groups. Aside from that expression of interest that Brooke went into, there was some modeling that was done and released in late June or early July within the pillar, so not released publicly, but that modeling looked at the impact of diagnostics within the broader response to COVID. And so while that might seem basic and understandable, there's certainly a communications aspect about the importance of diagnostics, which is kind of, and therapeutics too, but diagnostics where it's kind of forgotten in terms of the importance of actually being able to diagnose so that you can then treat and know where, where to apply other interventions. So modeling was done, and that modeling is currently being sort of worked out, and you'll have seen some of this coming out from some of the lead actors like Find and Global Fund in the diagnostic side, but there is some work around messaging and advocacy tools to bring that modeling that clearly shows the impact of diagnostics and how important it is to make sure that you can have the right kinds of tools to protect healthcare workers in formal and informal healthcare settings, as well as when to apply lockdowns and how diagnostics actually help you understand when to apply tools like lockdowns and other ones. So I'm probably not being as coherent as I could be, but we will make that available as those kinds of tools become more obvious. And that was an early piece of work that was done where members of civil society contributed to some of the modeling questions and how that was designed. Key new work that has taken place over the last couple of weeks was really some conversations between the leadership within the diagnostics and the therapeutics pillars to try and understand a little bit more about how important each is to the other, which is obvious, but also, in this context requires some conversation. Things like, diagnostics availability is key to determine what the therapeutic needs are going to be and how to make sure that you're deploying adequate therapeutic products and spending. And so some of those conversations have been taking place, and I gather they've been quite fruitful, although I wasn't involved in them personally. There do remain significant concerns around investments in the pillar. And as I said at the beginning of the call, we did just want to make sure that everybody's aware that we're running a selection process to make sure that we have good community and civil society representatives to the diagnostics pillar. So sorry for rushing a little there. I'm just conscious of time and updates, and the rest of those slides, like that earlier one that I had shown, should be available when we show, when we share things on the website, as well as that was that one I'd previously shown, as well as this one, which talks about those issues I just talked about in terms of the interplay between therapeutics and diagnostics. So that will be available online after the call. So Mike, if I could pass then over to you, I believe, in terms of, sorry everyone, I'm just going through my slides. But Mike, if I could pass it over to you for an update from the vaccines pillar, and then we do want to get to Q&A with everyone. Mike, over to you.
Sure, and I'm not sure if anyone involved with the Gavi CSO delegation is on the call. If so, please flag in the chat, because I'm going to be presenting this just because unfortunately the delegation, Gavi CSO delegation reps had other clashes that they couldn't join this call, so they sent their apologies. But so I'm giving the update, but really from written updates that they've given. So excuse me if I sort of get things slightly wrong. And colleagues from the Gavi CSO, please do pitch in. So just so over the last few weeks, over the last few weeks, there have been a number of calls, civil society calls with Gavi, CEPI and WHO, both on content updates, but also around civil society and community representation within the vaccine pillar. There was also the Gavi board meeting last week, and so there were some updates from there that I can share in terms of some of the key issues. As I'll come on to later on, civil society and communities have limited or no engagement in the vaccine pillar currently as representatives, and so we do have limited information on the active work of the particular working groups within each of the three work streams. But as we gather that information, then of course we will share that through the platform. So just to share a few of the key issues that came up at the Gavi board last week, really the main sort of issues there were around the COVAX facility and the COVAX AMC. The current proposals are based on an estimated time shortage of vaccines for the first 12 to 18 months. And Gavi made clear that candidates to make agreements will not be limited to the CEPI funded vaccines. A few of the key issues that arose are as follows. Firstly, around the price of or per dose. Gavi say that sort of infinite scenarios exist, including one of multiple doses, which will bring complexity in manufacturing, supply, and pricing. Little information on pricing is currently available, and the window to have a clearer picture on that will be around Q4 2020. There were also concerns raised around IP arrangements, particularly around global distribution, and Seth, the ED of Gavi, suggested tiered pricing might be an issue, but also that flat pricing might apply for some vaccines during the first phase of the epidemic. It seems that there is a lot to do on IP innovative approaches to ensure that equity and affordability are parts of the solution. It seems this is still, however, far from the sort of active discussions, and there's reason to push from civil society through any mechanisms. Another issue is really sort of, there were comments from the board members of the Gavi board on weakness, ambiguity and non-binding conditions about the manufacturers expected to seek minimal return during the acute phase, which is sort of 6 to 12 months, and to disclose push funding that they received. So this requires for sort of further clarification and action. And I know there's a lot of advocacy sort of being done on trying to ensure that there are very clear conditions, including around, for example, transparency around deals, but also sort of getting mobilization around the CTAP and trying to get support for that, and for manufacturers to sort of be working through that mechanism. Unfortunately, little was said at the Gavi board about supply, but the 20% threshold right now is for all countries. However, concern was raised around when this would apply. There is a need to identify priorities according to availability for procurement, and this could again play against equity. So this is another key issue that we're going to need to push. So those are the content issues I've got, and particularly around Gavi and its leadership areas. But of course, there's a whole other area around allocation framework that we really need to be engaging with WHO on. At the moment, you know, I'm not aware that civil society was particularly or at all engaged in the design of the allocation framework, and now it's unclear whether, you know, civil society will be involved actually in the implementation and the thinking, decision making around that. So we definitely need to push on that and push WHO there. And CEPI also, we need to sort of really look at their work stream also. So in terms of civil society involvement, just a couple of words on that. As I've highlighted, you know, we've on the first two calls, on the first call that we had with Gavi, CEPI and WHO, Seth, the ED of Gavi, and Richard Hackett from CEPI said, we don't see there's any need for civil society representation within the vaccine pillar. Consultation will be sufficient, to which there was a visceral reaction from civil society, as you can imagine. And following that call, there was considerable mobilization around that, just stating that we were not going to back down on our call for representation across each of the work streams within the vaccine pillar, and that we'd be willing to go public around this issue, which quickly led the lead agencies to respond by calling another civil society call and making a presentation that notionally put in a few civil society reps in a couple of the areas, but by no means met the demands that civil society have for representation across each of the working groups and each of the work streams. We are now, and then this issue was raised considerably, thankfully, with lots of support from across the Gavi board, from donors and other actors. And so, you know, Gavi in particular was put under a lot of pressure around this issue. So it's important to say there are no civil society representatives at the moment across the vaccine pillar, but there is sort of we're following up with both Gavi and the others around sort of getting the process running. The key other sort of discussion which Gavi and others have brought up is, well, we need to make sure that we have the right skill set amongst civil society, and that you know, we want to have a constructive collaboration and need to ensure the expertise is there. And as we've continually said, that is not an issue at all for civil society. We can run transparent, inclusive selection processes, as we have done for the diagnostic and therapeutic pillars, and would do that as soon as it was identified which civil society and community reps were needed. So in terms of sort of looking forward, you know, Gavi, CSO delegations and others will continue to push with Gavi Secretariat, and we will push also with WHO. But there may be a need in short order for a more public mobilization around this issue if we don't make progress very, very quickly, because decisions are being made and we're not at the table. That's it from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to ask if there's any other colleagues from sort of the vaccines who wanted to jump in with any other sort of updates or any other pieces of information. I see a few of you online, no need to, but if you did have anything else that you wanted to add to Mike's update, please go ahead. Not to put anybody on the spot, so I'm not going to name any names. Okay, well then let's open it up for questions and answers. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Rosemary to chair and facilitate this Q&A and discussion. Rosemary?
Yeah, thank you, Katie, and thank you, everyone. I think it's important to recognize and to acknowledge our colleagues, the civil society and community reps, who are giving us the inputs, the feedback, and representing us in the conversations that are going. Everything is moving so fast. And I think sometimes there's too much information, and we really appreciate the ability to then connect with us, feedback, and also get our input into this. So we'll dive right into the questions as far as pillar content is concerned, or questions around civil society representation. You can either type your question in the chat box, or you could raise your hand. I know we don't have so much time for this, but we can give it a shot. So Morgan, your hand is up. We could go with you first.
Moga, you may need to unmute.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is that on the diagnostics, rich countries have already hoarded all the diagnostics in the global market and leaving a little bit to developing countries. And this is what we hear from the countries. So it's kind of like fact. And we're trying to fight the hoarding in the vaccine pillar with the fair allocation that WHO is struggling to get through. Is that discussed, the hoarding of that already happened? And I know what's going on the vaccine side, but on the diagnostics, is that being discussed?
So
how,
I don't
basically how to do a fair allocation, a real fair allocation?
Yeah. So I see we have, thank you, Morgan. We have Robin. We could take maybe 3 and then have a conversation. So Robin.
Thanks very much. And first of all, just to emphasize what I said in the chat, Mike, it was very, and Courtney, very heartening to hear your degree of commitment to reaching out. We've seen it very clearly in the last few days, so thank you. I hope I'll stop being the interface and more people with long COVID will feel capable of participating. For now, I just have a couple of specific points on the diagnostics and therapeutics pillars. It was very helpful to hear Brooke's comments, and I don't know whether he's still on the call, but it did flag a few sort of alarm bells for me, which is that it's really nice to hear that we're looking at new approaches to both antigen and antibody testing to bring them closer to point of care. But I think we all need to remember, and this is where my long HIV history comes in, that testing has a very particular function, And in different epidemic contexts, test and trace is less relevant than others. And I really am very concerned about that. I think in HIV, firstly, we battled for over a decade to get reliable tests. And I want to just say something about that. But secondly, we have seen testing as a pathway to care. And at the moment, there is no care for those with long COVID. Certainly those of us who are not hospitalised and never have been. So that's a challenge. I think we need to think carefully about the over-reliance on diagnostic tools. And secondly, related to that, as anyone else who's been involved in the long COVID community will know, both antigen and antibody tests are proving to be heavily unreliable in those of us who have long COVID and in people who've had a particular patterning of early presentation. So I just wanted to put that out there and hope that the diagnostics pillar can look at those broader aspects of getting truly reliable tests, as well as looking at different modalities for the tests to be available. I think we would fail if we started doing widespread testing that is not picking up people with ongoing illness. And the final bit on diagnostics is we have a major question, those of us who are getting recurrent symptoms, as to whether viremia changes throughout the course of disease. And I don't know whether that is something that the diagnostics pillar is looking at. And if not, I'd like to just pop that on the table as something to encourage them to take forward from a community concern. And in terms of therapeutics, I've written a lot down, but it doesn't quite make sense to me anymore. But the one thing I did want to pick up on is this discussion of this as a virus. And I think, again, many of us who've had this for a number of months are experiencing this more as a syndrome. And as we saw with AIDS, although we didn't identify the virus so early on, you know, this is something that is a multi-organ condition, not just affecting the lungs. And so I hope that the therapeutics pillar is looking in that rounded way at the complexity of the natural history. And I think one of the challenges is, until the natural history is described, and we know that it is not yet described, and it can't yet be described because it's so new, then it's tough to focus on therapeutics, or, you know, so I'm just hoping, I don't know because I'm not in the detail, that is something that the therapeutics pillar is taking forward. I'll stop there. Thank you. I'm keen to hear more.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. So maybe since Robin, you've asked a series of questions or comments, we could open it to discussions or answers. If colleagues who have made presentations are able to lead us in that, or if not, if anyone on the call has intel around that, can support. There is a question around equitable access with Morgan, talking specifically around hoarding. And the questions are we discussing that? Is that something that is being looked into? And also the questions around approaches, around testing at the point of care, and so on and so forth from Robin. Anyone?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if there are other colleagues from Diagnostics who are currently on the call, just because a number of our key actors are actually on vacation this week. But so these are conversations that I've sort of been following in terms of what colleagues have been working on. So there's no easy answer other than to return to what we said earlier, which is that, you know, we're all kind of finding in many of the conversations that the equitable access mandate, so the issues around hoarding and issues around, you know, what the right avenues are to make sure that we're getting tests developed and out there and focusing on low middle income countries. It's just that has not become the focus of the conversation. It's being raised, I know, by colleagues in multiple different contexts within working groups within the Diagnostics Partnership, and I assume within the therapeutics one as well, because I mean, we heard Brooke, and Brooke is one of you know, the most strongly spoken people on this within sort of the work that we do. And I know that within the therapeutics pillar, they've begun work, Rachel, Felipe, and Brooke have begun work around trying to put some kind of framing around that for all of us in terms of, you know, how we counteract the fact that these aren't being discussed at the high level, despite it being sort of the core mandate, frankly, of ACTA. And I think there is sort of an element that, you know, it's important to remember that these things are sort of fairly new, and there are still important ways that we'll be able to influence those conversations. And so actually having civil society and community reps in place in both interim ways and as selection processes sort of finalize, and why it's important to get them the vaccines as well, is because these conversations are taking place and plans are being made, and we need to be there to raise sort of these kinds of issues. Robin, I think that you know a lot more about the various kind of testing and stuff than I do on a technical level, but what I would say is that, and it may have been a quick point and so it didn't sort of hit home, I know a lot of the discussion around Sorry, can you guys hear me?
We lost you momentarily, Katie.
Sorry, something happened with my microphone and yeah, sorry. And thanks, sorry. I'm not sure where I was, but just to say that there was a small point in what Brooke raised, and it's been coming up in different ways within the diagnostics, is the WHO sort of guidance. And, you know, Brooke mentioned that there was some new one that just came out yesterday, and so it's still sort of being reviewed, but, you know, sort of the WHO's sort of focus within diagnostics has been maybe a little bit of a compromise on effectiveness in order to get a more rapid test that can be utilized in a number of different settings, so that it's not simply, you know, hospital laboratory capacity kind of settings where you can get sort of fast responses to tests. So I don't think that's the answer that you're hoping for, Robin. And so I think that it's important to keep in touch and make sure that those points are continued to be raised, especially if those diagnostics are not being effective for long COVID, or even, you know, others, long haulers, whatever they're called. Yeah, so I don't think that that's the full answer, but just to say that this issue of equitable access, this issue of hoarding, this issue of supply is one, you know, that we're trying to get back to in a number of different ways throughout diagnostics in particular, and therapeutics as well, and alongside the other one. So I don't know if that answers the questions, but they're good questions.
Yeah, Katie, I think they also provide good input for the CS and community reps who are sitting in these discussions to sort of take this back to their discussions and help us to maybe explore these or actually raise these as questions that are coming from all of us. Yeah, it's a great start. So I think there's a question on the chat. Chase Perfect asking a question around selection of countries. Perhaps if you're able to ask this question, you could unmute and present this question, Chase.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, my question's just about the selection of countries. Will there be one group that's focused on across all ACTA pillars? So you say 10 countries and ACTA is only going to focus on those 10 countries? Or is it going to say 10 countries in this work stream, a different group of countries in another work stream? So that's the first question. And then the second one would be, do we have visibility on a timeline of when those decisions will be made and how?
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know if Javier, Mike, Katie, anyone can speak to this one.
I don't know why you guys are getting stuck with me on questions today. My apologies, but I know Javier had to get off for a TRP meeting. But Chase, my understanding is that the countries that are being selected within the health systems connector in terms of country preparedness are going to be the same across the pillars, in the sense that the health system connector, it is meant to do work across all of the pillars, if that makes sense. So it's not, it's meant to connect the dots between the three other sort of pillars and the issue of sort of country preparedness. So I would assume that those countries would be the ones that would be utilized across the different pillars, with the leadership in terms of those efforts coming out of the health systems connector. But it's a really good question, and Chase will get, I'll loop you in on an email with Javier and Justin and Robin around that specifically, to make sure that my understanding of it at least is correct. I hope that answers that.
Thank you, Kate. There is a question on Fontaine. I don't know if, Katie, you can get that.
On consent. Is it in the chat line? Sorry, I'm just missing.
Yes.
I think if you could read the question, I'm sorry everyone, but I think when my microphone and stuff flitted out there, I'm not seeing the question around consent. Sorry.
Okay, so maybe Ulrich, Silva, you could perhaps read the question. Sorry, I can't read French.
Sorry. So Ulrich, votre question était au sujet d'un manuel pour un process contre COVID-19. Est-ce que tu penses que c'est plutôt un plan opérationnel au sujet des différents thèmes que nous avons parlé aujourd'hui ou juste en général pour le COVID-19? So if just ask Ulrich to clarify the question in terms of, you know, whether or not it's a general sort of approach that he's suggesting here in terms of African countries, or if it's something more specific to the call, because I'm not sure that I understand the question with my limited French. So I don't know, Ulrich, if you can clarify. Or we can take this on, or if we can take this offline as well, we could do that too, not to take up all the time for Q&A, Rosemary.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one more question I think we should take and then move into the next section of wrapping up. So Sad, please.
Yes, can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
So, hello everyone, Saad here from Morocco, final year medical students and representing the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, IFMSA. So basically, as the largest student-led organization in the world representing 1.4 million medical students worldwide, we have been engaged in COVID response recently in the past months, you know, engaging mainly in supporting young people and vulnerable populations in communities, and also when it comes to vaccination, working on raising people's awareness and also educating health students and professionals. So I wanted to ask as a question how such youth organization and civil society organizations who are doing mainly field and awareness work and capacity building work can get more engaged in the Act A actions, and what opportunities are there for maybe such civil society organizations and young organizations, and thank you.
I'd like to answer part of that, Rosemary, if I could. It's Katie. Saad, it's really great to have you on the call. Thank you for joining. Certainly continuing to participate in these calls and these platforms is helpful. I would strongly urge you to consider applying for, you know, one of the positions within the diagnostics pillar, which we have shared the link, and it will be available online after for that selection process. But I mean, ultimately, I think bringing your ideas and bringing the issues of youth and students to this group and to these civil society representatives as they are selected will be really helpful in terms of showcasing those issues. So I would just say, you know, welcome, and please continue to participate. Please reach out to us as you can. We've mentioned the COVID-19 advocacy.org website that we're setting up. We're having some technical difficulties today, but we will sort it out. And there's contact information to be in touch with all of us who are currently leading, and we will update that as others take on sort of formalized positions. And so I think it's you know, this is a collective effort, and so having you on this call and having you participate and bring your ideas to us would be what we would hope for, and consider strongly the idea of applying for some of these positions as they become sort of open.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. And I think that question and what you have shared leads us into the next issue around what the plans are for this platform and what we see as opportunities to continue to convene and to have this kind of conversations. For example, the question around raising awareness, connecting with young people, connecting with civil society. One of the ideas we have is to have regional focused calls. So like have a call focus on Africa, have a call focus on Asia Pacific, Latin America, Caribbean, just ensuring that this conversation is not staying here, but that we are having an opportunity to connect with other groups at the regional level, and then that can trickle down to the national level in terms of how everybody can have access and engage with the ACT Accelerator. And so just thinking about our own communication channels, how we connect with all the groups who cannot be here on Saturday, and also how we facilitate conversations and feedback. So this is something that we are thinking of and perhaps can help in ensuring that there is outreach to other civil society and to other groups. So maybe Katie or Mike could perhaps take that forward in terms of what other thinking we have on how we connect and how we support consultation and outreach with other groups.
Yeah, thanks, Rosemary. For sure, try to follow up on some of those specific questions with the individuals who raised them. And apologies that we don't necessarily have the answers today, but we'll do our best to get them sort of sorted out. I know Mike is running late for another call, and we are at the time of our call, so or sorry, the end time for this call. We did want to talk to all of you a little bit about coordination and convening and sort of the ongoing work. I don't want to rush it, but I did just want to say, Mike, if you've got 2 seconds to talk about sort of consultations and what we hope to do there and what we're looking for feedback essentially from all of you on how to do that. Well, Mike, if you have 2 minutes, it would be great to have a quick overview introduction from you on that.
Sure, thanks, Katie. Yeah, so really what we wanted to sort of share with everybody was our, you know, where we got to so far, where we hope to be moving in terms of sort of consultations and opportunities for engagement and sharing your opinions and concerns and questions. As you know, so we now have the COVID-19 advocacy.org website, and that will be a key platform for sharing, obviously, sort of key documents related to each of the pillars, and reaching out to you on both on your opinions around sort of any documents that we have through this civil society reps, but also sort of on key questions that we might come up in the working groups if they give us enough time to actually do a consultation, or a bit more proactively sort of gathering from you what those sort of key questions and concerns are, and developing sort of positions that the civil society reps can then have at their fingertips in order to input into discussions as they come up. We definitely be looking to have these sort of broader consultations on key questions and documents. We also are looking perhaps to pull together smaller advisory groups around that can support the particular civil society reps. So there's maybe people with particular expertise on different topics that can provide some more in-depth thinking and sort of more regular feedback to the civil society representatives. We're also sort of just, that's some of the work that we are committed to doing as the COVID-19 advocacy sort of platform and facilitation, but really conscious that there are and need to be a whole host of sort of broader civil society discussions and that are already happening or that need to be sort of set up around each of the different sort of pillars, but also around COVID more broadly, but not just in relation to the ACT Accelerator, that we need to be connecting to and to be sort of mutually informing. There are some that are out there that have already been operating, like the Pandemic Action Network around Kel Karar and some of the work of the G7 activists that have been sort of doing work on COVID and developed principles, but there are many others on individual topics. So this sort of links to mapping work that Courtney's going to talk about shortly, but we're really interested and want to hear from you what it is that you hope for from us. What can we facilitate through the platform and connecting to the CS reps that would be helpful for you to engage. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, and apologies to everyone that we're kind of rushing through this stuff at the end of the call, and we'll find some way to you know, either create a Google form or something, or some kind of method where we post the outcomes from this call, like the recording and the PowerPoint, so that we can hopefully share some of these questions that we have and gather some ideas from all of you in terms of what would be helpful and what would be useful. One of the things that we, that we want to do more of is make sure that we're linking into some of those other efforts that are taking place. And I know Mitchell Warren, I think if I'm getting your last name correctly, I know Mitchell's been on a few calls and has been following some of this, but as doing sort of a separate piece of work, and wondered if Mitchell, if you wanted to briefly speak about that Advocates Advisory Board work that you're doing, and maybe even quick reflections on how that might link into the work that we're doing with civil society reps, and how civil society reps in ACT-A could or should be involved in that work. Mitchell?
Absolutely, Katie, thank you so much, and to Mike and others, really appreciate the opportunity. And I was just actually, in case I had to jump off, as I might in a couple of minutes, I'll go ahead and post this in the chat as well with a couple of links. But I think, as some of you on the line will know, AVAC, along with the Treatment Action Group and the International Treatment Preparedness Coalition and a bunch of others, launched a COVID Advocates Advisory Board. And it really is meant to hopefully connect the dots with the amazing work described in the last 90 minutes. And this group is focused very much on the research side of things and engaging with some of the various moving parts of the research world, not only on the vaccine front, but obviously, as you all will know, there's a huge amount of very rapid, accelerated work in the COVID vaccine landscape. And so this group is looking at that, as well as therapeutic and diagnostic research, and just officially launched it this last week. And amazingly, we don't want to confuse anybody, there's covidadvocates.org, and of course the global COVID-19 or the COVID-19 advocacy.org sites. And we obviously want to cross-link and mutually support all of these efforts. On this Advocates Advisory Board, it is looking to engage not only with the ACT Accelerator, but also with, as many of you will know, the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has a new African vaccine-focused program. The US government obviously investing hugely in a number of both therapeutic and vaccine endeavors. And the idea here is not to replace trial or clinical trial site specific community advisory boards, but it is to create a bit of a connective tissue around bringing engagement into the research landscape. As Robin knows so well and has taught me so well over the years, the work we've all done in HIV advocacy generally, and certainly in the research engagement, is something that we need to apply in real time quite rapidly in the COVID research landscape. I just want to be really clear, this is really meant to work collaboratively with the platform that Katie and Mike and Rosemary described. And I think we probably all need to work, just to Mike, your last point, to get to a point where there are some shared shared statements, shared positions, not only for the civil society reps in the ACT Accelerator, but also how it fits into all of the other acronyms that have been created over the last 7 months, so that we're all kind of aligned and doing the best we can to be consistent and mutually supportive. So maybe I'll stop there. And again, apologies, the website, covidadvocates.org, does happily, they look a lot alike, and that's great. We need to make sure they're cross-linked. This is really meant to be shared spaces throughout, and it's just a good example that civil society is thinking a lot of the same things across a lot of these different platforms. So maybe I'll just stop there, and happy to take any questions separately. The website is there, and feel free to, there's a way to sign up to that. It's very loose right now. We expect that there will need to be a little bit more formalized structure, but we felt like we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. As research needed to go fast, so too did civil society engagement in it. So please do feel free to be in touch through that website, or I'm at, very simply, Mitchell with 2 L's at avac.org, and happy to work with any and all of you.
Thanks, Mitchell. That's really helpful. And yeah, I think it's both terrifying and exciting to learn all of the, you know, the great work that's being done, and trying to make sure that we're connecting all of the dots, and making sure that we're not missing out on opportunities to speak with each other, because there's so much great work that is being done. We just wanted to leave you with 2 final quick thoughts around some of the work we're doing, and then again, we'll wrap up this call. I'm so sorry that we've gone over. We will figure out this right balance as we get going and go further in terms of technical sort of information and what's helpful and useful in terms of sharing back to you, and having the opportunity to listen and hear back from all of you in terms of ideas and suggestions on what we need to do collectively together, and to you know, bring all of those dots and bring all of that work together. So Rosemary and Courtney both had quick updates around regional focus calls and some mapping work that we've started. So Rosemary, if I could pass it to you, and then Courtney to give quick updates, and then we'll wrap up this call. And thanks to all of you who are staying on for an extra few minutes.
Actually, Katie, I did mention about the regional calls already at the question time, that we are considering having supporting regional calls that will help to engage with civil society, community reps at the regional level, just in terms of us thinking how we consult and facilitate feedback, and also we hear from colleagues who are not able to be at this meeting that we are having. So this is a work in progress, and we'll keep you updated on how that unfolds.
Okay, sorry, Rosemary, I apologize. I must have been responding to a message or something. Courtney, did you have the 1-minute version instead of the 5-minute version for us?
I do, yeah. It's just to say, obviously we are keen to make sure that we're connecting with as many civil society, community groups as possible. And we are trying to sort of think about how we do sort of understand where those groups are and how we do communicate and sort of facilitate these discussions. So we'll be setting up a Google form that will be sent out for anybody to sign up to a mailing list to be kept up to date on this kind of work on ACT. And we just ask everyone to sort of share widely with your networks as well, just to make sure that we are reaching everyone who is interested in being kept up to date on ACT.
Thanks, Courtney. And thanks to all of you for joining this call today. You know, we're excited by the work. It feels a little overwhelming, but it also feels like we're starting to have the conversations that we need to have, and we're starting to find all of the other great people who are engaged in work, which includes all of you. And so quick reminders that we will post this on the COVID-19 advocacy.org website as soon as we're able to after the call with the PowerPoints. We will have other information that we will be sharing there for all of you, so please watch that space. And then we will you know, be trying to hold these kinds of calls, this kind of information sharing, general calls, about every 4 to 6 weeks, depending on sort of how much is actually moving, but that we're also going to likely have these regional sort of conversations and other conversations where the focus is more on different elements of the work as we go forward, and working with many of you in partnership to make those happen. So I just remind you, I think I've put it in the chat, my email is Katie, Katy @icssupport.org, and I'm happy to receive questions or comments on any of this, and we'll do our best to follow up on the questions that we were not able to answer fully today, and do that in the coming days. So thank you all for making the time, staying on the call, and being engaged and interested. We look forward to continuing to partner with you in all of this work. So thank you, and thanks to all my fellow colleagues and speakers today for sharing information. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.